Good morning. I wanted to personally introduce this panel. So many incredible women, tech, venture, and financial inclusion, women at the forefront of making cities smart. I'm really looking forward to all of you being inspired by Joanna's work at the Aspen Institute, Avantika investing in cutting-edge technologies, Penny, background in technology and now running Women in Technology, and my dearest friend, Susan McPherson, who's been at the forefront of CSR efforts and making sure women have a platform. So I look forward to hearing this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's give a round of applause for the woman who just walked off the stage, who basically conceived this entire summit. And it's certainly, if you look at all the speakers, extraordinarily inclusive and diverse. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. As mentioned, I'm Susan McPherson, and I run a corporate responsibility social impact consultancy. But we're here to hear about what these three very, very talented executives do. So I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves so that I don't butcher names and, maybe not be able to explain exactly what they do. So I'm going to start here with Penny on my right. Well, I can never tell stage right, stage left, but over to you.
Awesome. Penny Collins. I am the CEO of Women in Technology, and Women in Technology is an advocate for women in technology. We really look at how do we become advocates and use our passion to get more women into STEAM-related careers, and how do we support them as executives and as leadership and within our companies to make sure that they have a voice, that we help them to have a voice, and that we also encourage them and support them as they go through their careers. Women in Technology has been a nonprofit here in Atlanta for 27 years. And I know with my background in technology, having Women in Technology for me before was incredible because it made me realize that I was not alone being the only really woman in technology. And so we want to change that trajectory and see what we can do to actually really move forward and move that needle forward to get more women in this career.
And to give an idea to the audience of how large and pervasive the organization is, how many?
We have a membership of about 25,000 women across Georgia.
Just in Georgia?
Just in Georgia.
Wow. All right. To be continued. Avantika.
Thank you. I guess it's STEAM to STEM. For those of you who don't know what STEAM is, it's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And we do STEM. So I'm Avantika Dang at Plum Investments, and as a partner, I run and manage all of venture investments for Plum. We have a very unique investment thesis focused on sector and stage, driven by investing in deep tech and frontier healthcare companies from seed to Series B. We have an investment mandate that's driven through a gender lens, and so we invest in supporting fierce, gender-diverse leadership and co-founding teams, specifically with the requirement that one co-founder has to be a woman. We've deployed now over $18 million across 18 companies, and that's soon to increase pretty rapidly, given that we're on a couple of very exciting live deals. And the one point I'll mention, to your point about being the first woman and the only woman, our perspective is that there's a lot out there, so it's not a supply and demand question, which is what we get a lot as investors. Our member LPs, individual LPs often ask us, you have a very specific investment thesis and a mandate. Are you locking me out from the rest of the deals? And our answer is no, because we don't have a supply and demand problem. Our supply is so intense that we cannot keep up with good investment decisions, supporting right tech, right healthcare across the US, but internationally as well.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Joanna Smith-Ramani. I'm the Managing Director at the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program. The Institute is an international organization, mostly domestically focused, but we have other offices around the world that really is trying to get all kinds of leaders across sectors, government leaders, technology leaders, private sector leaders, nonprofit leaders, to build a better world. The world I'm trying to make better is around financial security and trying to really focus on the financial challenges facing Americans. I think what's so exciting about this conversation is that, one, I work a lot with the finance sector and with the FinTech sector in particular. There are not enough women in that area, but also just thinking about who are the leaders that should be designing the kinds of products that help Americans is a big question, and having diversity and inclusion there is really the only way cities will be smart, our country will be smart, and we'll get to the right kinds of solutions for the right kinds of problems.
Thank you. And show of hands, who isn't familiar with the Aspen Institute? Look at that. Wow, talk about pervasive, right?
Yeah, that's very exciting.
So I want to dive in quick to start with, we all know that the smartest cities in the world today, and there's not a whole lot of them, but we are seeing many pushing the envelope. The ones that are truly doing the best are doing so in a very inclusive nature. Where do you feel we have fallen short? And we are in the U.S., so let's specifically look at that area in terms of building inclusive cities. And when I say inclusive, I don't just mean women, but I mean disabled, people of color, those genders that don't conform. I mean, think of it as a broader universe.
I'll go ahead and start. I actually would like to take the liberty of showing a couple of slides. First of all, I think the topic that Aarti, thank you, you and Susan have put together for today is very important. It's a multimodality approach. It cannot just be about regulation. It cannot just be about, financial inclusion or technologies. Often enough, when we say smart cities, we think, oh, that's going to be the future, flying cars, autonomous dynamic traffic light. That's not the case, right? So it has to be a multimodality approach, thinking about it holistically from a regulation perspective, technology perspective, financial investment, economic development, closing that disparity between the haves and have-nots, between the nucleus center of the cities as well as suburbs. The idea here is not for you to squint your eyes and look at this chart. What I really want you to focus on is that last bar, the gray bar that's so high. What that's saying is that there was over $130 billion deployed just in the US in venture capital money last year alone. Less than, or about 2.2% went to female founded companies, and additional 14% went to gender diverse founded companies, right? And Susan mentioned the point, so what? Most of us have heard this data. The so what is that if we cannot get this right, it is not going to trickle down to economic development. And economic development has to be a trickle-down approach. It's not doing what's right, but it's also doing what makes sense financially. So from an economic vantage point, why should smart cities be inclusive on all fronts is because it's just better ROI. There have been longitudinal studies done by BCBG, McKinsey, Cambridge Associates, and the study by BCBG shows that you actually have a 10% higher revenue over 5 years by female co-founded.
People pay taxes, and if they're making money, guess what?
Yes.
They're gonna pay the government,
Yes.
which in turn leads to more, services for everyone who lives there.
Right. And then another data point before I turn it over to my wonderful panel participants here is that Cambridge Associate also did, and if you are not familiar with Cambridge Associates, they're sort of the McKinsey of the world, the thought leaders. I'm sure they probably didn't appreciate me creating that analogy, but they're the thought leaders in the world on investments, how to do it, economic development, allocation across asset classes. And their longitudinal studies showed that across all financial metrics, where leadership was 50% in balance, gender balance, they had higher returns, right? So I'll just stop there because if we get that right, the economic power it brings to a city to make it smart in other areas is pretty transparent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, I think I don't totally believe that this is trickle down. I don't know if exactly how you meant about it in like traditional economic policy sense, because it in fact isn't. It's creating wealth that is not trickle down, that is actually in ownership of the companies, right? Of actual women, of people of color, of impacted people. It's building leadership in a more diverse way. So we're not trickling the wealth. It is being built by those people themselves. No one's waiting on it, right? And I don't think that's what you meant, but I was like, not trickle down.
Yes.
Share.
Don't tweet trickle down.
Right, distributed better for the talent that exists, right?
Thank you. I'm sorry, could we move back one slide? Because I think I moved forward real quick and it's in cybersecurity.
Oh.
Which we can talk about.
Or we can talk about cybersecurity all morning, an area of deep expertise in.
Penny, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think it's really important also to look at diversity within that as well. So when you look at smart cities, when you look at investments, when you look at diversity as a whole, it's not just diversity within women, but it's in diversity within the disabled, with the young, the old, with all the different types of diversity that we have. So I think your points are really, really valid, as well as making sure that we look at the diversity across people as well.
So if we want to create these smart cities where women from diverse backgrounds can thrive, what do we need to be thinking about? What are some like conscientious steps we can be taking?
You know what's very interesting is if you think about the population, 50%, more than 50% of the population is women. So let me focus on women. And when you look at the development and the policies and the things that we're trying to do from a smart city perspective, you have to involve women if half of the solution and half of the problem involves women. So I think it's very critical that we're not only inclusive of women, but it's also the different age groups of women. Because when you look at us old ladies here, when you look at diversity, every person experiences a city in different ways. A man is going to experience a city in a different way than a woman is, and then the different ages of women. So if I am 80 years old versus 20 versus whatever, each of our needs are going to be different. So I think if we're going to really, truly solve the issues that we're trying to solve with having a smart city, you've got to look at all of that. So I think we're making progress in that. One thing that is I just love is to see a lot of women now that are part of the policy making, because not only do you have to be inclusive, but you also have to be able to measure it. If you don't have policies in place that force you to measure it, you don't know where you're going, where you're getting better and where you're not. And you don't know where you need to go to fix the problem. So I think we have to be able to look at all of that. And I think I've seen a lot of improvement, but we're having this conversation, so we have a ways to go.
And a few data points just for your own edification. New York City obviously is a challenging city, no doubt, but it is doing tremendous work in terms of pushing for inclusivity, et cetera. And there is something that's run out of the New York Economic Development Fund called Women.NYC, which is a tremendous resource for women entrepreneurs. And there's a global platform called Apolitical. And Apolitical is a global network of civil servants around the world, almost on the municipality level, so that those civil servants can be connecting to innovation and inclusivity.
Exactly.
So both of those are great resources from which.
And one thing, real quickly, is if you look at what some of the smart cities that are in place have done, let's look at Vienna as a perfect example. When they involved women into the decision making, they started realizing that when they were building a smart city, where they were building walking paths, that the walking paths were too small to actually hold strollers for mothers that were trying to take their children. And then they also looked at the applications. Were the applications usable enough for the mothers? So there's so much that needs to go into the development of a smart city. So,
and it's not just tech, and a lot has to do with finance.
Well, and a lot has to do with the other leadership, right? Like, where's the diversity in city leadership on the political side? Where are we bringing in diversity from impacted people, from nonprofit? Our whole, part of Aspen's work is pushing ideas, building leaders, and really challenging ourselves on who is the leader. It's not the person with the fancy title, right? And where is the opportunity we're giving others? What this just made me think, Penny, is that we do work in housing, actually, because it's such a big financial obligation, and then a whole host of debt, retirement, things like that. But if there are any women entrepreneurs in this audience, and I'm sure you'll meet others today, Like, we need women thinking about affordable housing. Like, we need women in all of the sectors where we actually need diversity and inclusion for smart cities. And I just don't meet a ton of women in housing innovation. And that is an enormous shame because most low-wage households are run by women. And so thinking about people designing for people they know. I definitely don't see a lot of women in financial technology. Again, the financial decision makers in households, especially low-wage households, are women, and that's a lot of what we see in city, residents.
How do we solve that?
Well, I am not, through your fund. I also think, again, I have the luxury of building tables. So I work with a lot of mayors, I work with governors, I work with CEOs of financial firms, and I get to decide who sits there. And I feel like that's like part of what Aspen is, and it sounds super snobby, and that's why we get a lot of crap for being like snobby elitist, but I take that job very seriously in a way where then I get to help build the kind of leadership we need by being and many of you here have that power too, being very particular about who gets to come, and then they get sort of anointed as a leader, and that starts building their connections and their networks and their knowledge around how to do those things.
I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly, Avantika. And with Plum Alley, you're helping drive investment dollars to technology companies, healthcare, FinTech, normal tech.
I hope housing.
that are. Can you talk about a few examples, perhaps, of companies you have funded that are helping cities be smarter?
Yeah, absolutely. From a perspective of your original question, leading into examples of inclusion, we often look at it from a lens outside of what the two of you said. So I'm kind of glad I'm sandwiched between the two of you, is between health and supply talent, education. If we cannot get that supply talent, AKA education, starting from from bottoms up, into graduating talents, into master's, PhD, really creating that STEM pool, and in your case, that STEAM pool, it's a feeder. It makes everything that sits above it that much more successful. And so as investors, we're very interested to ensure that that talent pool is strong. And we're very encouraged to, Susan, the points you've made. I'm a New Yorker, and very interested with the collaborations the cities had with organizations like Cornell, Stanford, Georgia Tech. There's just so much happening, some above the line, some below the line, some in major ways where it's taking over an island and they're putting a tech institute that is focused about gender and ethnic and income diversity. So there's a lot of policies about eliminating the barrier of payment for students who can't afford it. A lot of good thinking that goes into it. Some examples in our portfolio that make our city smart. I think we've got a pretty wide diversity for diversity in a different way. We've got one of our companies called Einride showcasing, if you walk around on the convention center, they've got their big T-Pod. It's a huge truck, all electric, autonomous road freight transportation system, female co-founder, right? And they're dealing with the non-sexy stuff behind the scenes, logistics that you don't see, but that makes a city smart. Why all electric? I'm going to not steal their story. Another company is in healthcare, right? We've heard so much that female healthcare is so specific that a lot of times really great founders and brilliant technology with superbly defensible IP doesn't get funded because the VCs that they approach don't fully understand them, whether it's female health, fertility, female hygiene, without getting into too much detail. And then on the other side of what you're talking about, housing, I agree with you. We actually have seen some brilliant founders, because the future of smart cities is very much driven by the next generation. They're an asset-free generation. So how do you build smart cities on an asset-free generation when they're not interested in owning homes, owning cars, or taking on any big-ticket items that our generation
Or leaving the house and playing in the yard.
Right, right. And
Sorry.
everything is virtual, right? They play, but,
Yeah.
in a digital space. And so one has to be a little bit conscious about how do you construct the policies, the regulators, and who you invite to the table from that lens as well. Because it's about understanding today but fixing tomorrow.
Penny, you looked like you were
Yeah, and
about to say something.
I think it's really important that we're also look at, back to what you're saying, you gotta have a diverse team all coming to the table to help with the policies, to help with the technology solutions. And it takes that diversity that sparks innovation. And when you spark innovation, that is when you start making great decisions around the solutions that you're bringing to the people in your community. You know, the one thing we have to remember too is part of having a smart city is that you're looking at all the different economical, you know, levels. You're looking at everybody as a whole, and you can't design something and implement something without that in mind.
Sure.
So I'm hoping we've learned from our past, I wouldn't say mistakes, but it's more of we've learned more as we've gotten more into technology, as we've gotten more into what it takes to really make sure that we're implementing across the board, you know, for all the different diversities and all the different genders.
But I think if I hear you correctly, yes, we need diversity at the table, but if we don't create a world where people feel included, all the diversity in the world isn't going to matter.
Exactly.
So public policy leaders, obviously in conjunction with business and nonprofits, need to work together to make all of those who may feel disenfranchised included. And then diversity can be magic. And I just want to say a quick item about healthcare. I always go back to this study or information that I found that a woman who has a heart transplant, evidently, for whatever reason, because probably it was male scientists who did this, the average size of the heart, the artificial heart, doesn't fit in the average woman's chest cavity. Okay? So if any of you are going to get an artificial heart at any time in your lives, make sure they have fixed that problem, because you don't want a heart that is too big. I bring this up not to be facetious, but I think it shows when you don't have diverse thinking going into something so vitally important that your life depends upon it. Imagine if you extrapolate that out to the broader world of a city or a state or a country for that matter. All right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Can I just share something towards that?
Yes.
That's very
We'll
real.
get to the last
and
question.
It's not just on the healthcare side. I'm involved with a group that's focused on putting the first woman on the moon, given that it's been 50 years.
The space, the clothing, whatever it's called, the astronaut. They
And
didn't have one that
we thought we had big problems to solve. Our first problem was to figure out the astronaut suit.
couldn't fit the women. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. And there's a Saturday Night Live skit that you have to see about that. Okay, we are digressing, so we're going to get back. But you can't say this wasn't a fun panel, although someone's leaving, so. So to create truly inclusive cities requires, as Joanna eloquently stated, collaboration. Collaboration between government, cities, government, companies, nonprofits, and quite frankly, the citizens. Can you share an example of a successful collaboration and why you think it worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I have the opportunity, really the joy and privilege to work with elected officials around the country on different issues around the intersection of this and really centering around the real financial lives of Americans. We have a initiative we call Finance Forward, where we go to different cities and work very deeply with their mayors, citizens, civic leaders, business leaders. Anyhow, we've been working with St. Louis, this really amazing treasurer named Tashara Jones. Look her up. She is definitely one to watch. And did a ton of work to discover issues around income volatility in her community, so the ups and down swings of income of a lot of her residents and what that was doing to the whole economic stability of the city. So we came in, kind of did our table setting as I described, and brought in all kinds of sector leaders, again, truly centered around the real life experiences of St. Louis residents, and came to a bunch of conclusions. One, these sound so simple, but think about how these could make your cities so much more smart and efficient. One was that parking tickets were a really big expense shock. So you get a parking ticket, it's $200. It's hard to pay out of nowhere. I think I see a lot of nods, right? No matter what your income level is, that's like, oh crap.
How many have had a parking ticket in their life?
Right, or like a red light ticket, something where you're like, I don't have $500 right at this moment. But their technology in the city was so old that they could not do a payment plan for people. So this would have an enormous quality of life change in the city, right? To be making city payments, all kinds of payments and payment plans. It sounds so simple, but there wasn't a technology that was available to them. So it actually took several, as people who do city contracting probably know this to be true. It took too long, but we got there. And Tashara recently announced that now they have a layering. They're working with an outside tech company. They work directly with residents of the city to design this program, where you can actually, again, make payments to the city for things that are owed instead of one lump sum, which again has an enormous outside impact on families. But it did really involve an outside tech company. I firmly believe cities should not be running their own technology. It changes too quickly and they are not capable of keeping up. It deeply involved understanding the residents and the resident leaders about what is the priority for what they need. And then it involved needed the creativity of a city leader to say, we're gonna do this and we're not gonna solve for a problem I think exists or what tech companies think exists. We're gonna solve for a problem community residents know exists in their daily life. And it's again, this sounds weird and small. It's going to be huge in that city. A really small related problem related to technology there that we are still working on with them is how to get city employees to be able to save not just for retirement and their paycheck, but for other things. But again, their old technology system would only let their payments go to their checking account, their health care, their retirement. There was not a third. It's 2019. I can save into 20 different, you can have an unlimited way to split up your paycheck. But these old systems in cities really need collaborative tech partners to do these things that will totally change the lives of city employees who are also residents.
Absolutely. Penny, were you going to?
Yeah, and another solution just around the fintech area as well is companies using technology where they help people at, for example, Walmart. A lot of employees that work there cannot afford to have checking accounts because of the fees and the expenses that are associated with that. And as a result, they don't have checking accounts. So they have to take their checks to a check processing company, pay a huge fee to actually do that. Where technology has helped that is a company that had developed a solution where it was almost like a prepaid check card where the employees could deposit their checks onto this card, no fees, nothing. They're able to save their money, so they are able to segregate their money, and it enables them to save their money, pay their bills, feel like they've got a credit card that allows them to actually live like other people live.
It's a form of economic dignity.
Exactly, everywhere you go, a hotel, a car, or anything. And that was an incredible solution that absolutely helped the underserved areas.
I'll focus on one example, a company called Aclima, A-C-L-I-M-A, a brilliant example of public-private partnership, enterprise, government, and academia. UC Berkeley is involved. They do hyper-local data collection for the environment on real-time, high resolution. So if there's a methane leak or a gas leak, or you just want to understand as you're Google mapping your way around what the environment is. California had huge fires. Emergency response, they had multiple times more calls coming into Aclima than the first responders because people wanted to understand the health of the environment where they lived because it directly impacted them. Aclima came out of UC Berkeley. Founder Davida Hersel and her family partnered with California regulators. It's pretty phenomenal. Google it. There's a huge video out there of all the regulators going around saying aye to a contract that was given to Aclima where California and the regulation authorities felt extremely passionately and no choice to be had that every municipality had to monitor their environment. Then they partnered with Google to put their sensors behind Google fleet cars. What a brilliant partnership, because they didn't have to scale on their own. They could ride the coattails of Google and go wherever Google's fleet cars are going, and along with enterprise partnerships and public housing. So very much a multimodality approach of how do you build something right from the get-go, truly understanding the users, but the constituents, the policymakers, and the business element of the enterprise as well.
So what I'm hearing from you three is you're optimistic that we know we need to get there, and we're making strides slowly, not never as fast as we want. Are there any specific cities in the United States you think are actually being the most inclusive? in terms of developing technology for the future?
I would say there's not one city specifically that's inclusive on all fronts.
No.
It's taking a multimodality approach. I think LA, as a smart city, is very much ahead on the tech side. I am not educated enough to comment on the regulation side, but definitely tech. They're being very thoughtful about the MSAs, who they're building in.
Well,
bringing
and
in.
being very thoughtful and deliberate on environmental
Yes.
issues as
yes.
well.
New York, on the other hand, I think is being very smart for different reasons, mostly to do with getting the building blocks right. You know, going back to my comment earlier about healthcare, housing, education, but you know, other cities are focused on it from a different perspective as well.
I agree, because I think when you look at smart city solutions, it has to be city specific. And so what may work for one city may not work for another, just because of the community that they're actually trying to serve. So I would say New York absolutely is doing some incredible things, you know, from a diversity and from a technology perspective.
We
Solutions
still have
that
a long
meet
way
them.
to go, though.
Exactly, but it fits their community, and it fits what that lifestyle is. It may not work in Los Angeles, so I think everyone has elements of goodness, but I'm hoping that we kind of take it to the next step.
Yes,
that's what we need
for
to do.
sure. Well, check out Apolitical, because you can find out what's happening globally in everywhere from Tallinn to Bogota to, you know, Moscow. I want to thank everyone in the audience. I want to thank the team that put this panel together, and of course, I want to really thank our panelists, Joanne, Avantika, and Penny. And I want to close with one quick story. And I didn't think of this before just now, but my first job ever when I was 15 was working for the Albany County Department of Social Services. And when I think about the job I did that summer, I know we've come a long way, because don't get me wrong, I had to actually, when people who lived in Albany passed away, I had to take their file from the living file drawer to the deceased file drawer. All summer long, files. This was, you know, obviously, I was going to work riding a dinosaur, but anyhow. So yes, we have made progress, folks. Okay, with that said, have a wonderful day at the rest of the conference, and thank you for joining
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.
You say